The pilot worked, the material worked, the sustainability story made sense, and still the buying system said no. That's the problem I want to talk about today, because one of the most common failures in circularity is not technical failure. It's not always that the material does not perform. It's not always that the supplier cannot make the thing. And it's not always that the sustainability team was wrong. Sometimes the pilot works, but procurement does not change. When procurement does not change, the old business model quietly wins. I'm calling this the procurement ceiling. The procurement ceiling is the point where a credible circularity pilot proves technical value, but then fails to scale because the buying rules still protect the old model. Those buying rules may look neutral at face value: lowest unit cost, reliable supply, known supplier, existing specification, short-term margins, quarterly targets, and commercial risk. But those are not neutral. They're beliefs existing in operational form. They tell the organization what it really values, and very often they tell the circularity team something painful. Your pilot can be praised, your case study can be published, your innovation can be featured on stage. But when the next purchase order is written, the old logic may still decide. This is why circularity so often stalls after the proof of concept stage. The company learns that the new material can work. It learns that the reuse model can work. It learns that the supplier is credible. It learns that the story is good, but it does not change the buying system that determines whether the solution becomes normal. Renewcell is one of the clearest examples, and I've spoken about this before. In January 2023, I interviewed Trisha Carey of Renewcell on the Circularity Catalyst podcast. At the time, the story was hopeful. Renewcell had developed Circulose, a recycled textile pulp made from cotton-rich textile waste. The promise was powerful. Used textiles could become a new raw material for new fibers. Fashion could begin closing one of its most difficult material loops. There was brand interest. There were partnerships. There was investment. There was a major production facility. There was a story the fashion industry wanted to tell about circularity. Then in February 2024, Renewcell filed for bankruptcy. The simple explanation is that there was not enough demand, but that's only true as far as it goes, and it's not enough. The deeper question is, why was there not enough demand for a material the industry said it needed? Why did interest not become enough purchasing commitment? Why did pilots and public support not become mainline adoption? Why did a circular material exist before the buying system was ready to absorb it? That is the procurement ceiling. Renewcell did not show that textile-to-textile recycling was impossible. It showed something more uncomfortable. A company can solve part of the circularity problem and still depend on a market system that has not changed its rules. Renewcell could make the pulp, but the wider system still had to collect and sort the textile waste. Brands still had to commit beyond pilot quantities. Product teams still had to absorb or justify a price premium. Procurement still had to choose a new material over the more familiar one. And finance had to tolerate a difficult timeline for scaling. And investors still had to believe the market would move faster. That is not just a demand problem, it's a responsibility boundary problem. Who owns the loop? Who pays for the transition? Who carries the premium before scale reduces it? Who changes the specification? Who commits before the economics are perfect? Who decides that circularity is not just a sustainability claim, but now it's a buying rule? In many companies, no one fully owns those questions. So the pilot sits in one part of the organization, while the buying decision sits somewhere else. The sustainability commitment sits in the report. The procurement rule sits in the operating system. And the old model keeps on winning. This is why I think we need to be careful with the phrase, the pilot failed. Sometimes the pilot did not fail. Sometimes the pilot succeeded at proving the wrong thing. It proved that the material could work, but it also proved that the company or the industry had not changed the system that's required to buy it. That is a very different diagnosis. If we call it a technology failure, we look for better technology. If we call it a marketing failure, we look for better storytelling. If we call it a cost problem, we wait for scale. But when we call it a procurement ceiling, we ask a harder question. What would have to change in the buying system for this solution to now become the default? Now that question matters because circularity does not scale through admiration. It scales through purchase orders, through specifications, through contracts, through supplier requirements. It scales through budget authority. It scales when the buying system is redesigned to value what the circular solution actually. And that means procurement is not a back office function in the circular economy. Procurement may be where the real sustainability strategy lives. Not the stated strategy, the real one, the one that decides what gets bought, what gets rejected, what gets treated as too expensive, what gets treated as too risky, what gets normalized, and what gets left as a pilot. This is the uncomfortable. A company can say it wants circularity and still buy like a linear business. A brand can invest in a circular material startup and still fail to create enough demand for the material. A sustainability team can celebrate an innovation while the commercial system continues to reward the cheaper virgin input. A pilot can be successful and still go nowhere because the belief underneath the buying system has not changed. The belief may be the sustainability is valuable, but only if it reaches price parity first. It may be circularity is important, but not important enough to change margin expectations. Innovation is desirable, but not if it disrupts existing sourcing rules. And responsibility matters, but only inside the boundary we already control. Those beliefs do not normally appear in the strategy documents. They're in purchasing decisions, and that's why procurement ceiling is so important. It shows where the public sustainability commitment meets the private operating logic of the business. If those two do not match, the pilot will usually lose. So before launching the next circularity pilot, I would ask 5 questions. First, if this pilot works, who has already agreed to buy it at scale? Second, what procurement rule will have to change for the solution to move from pilot to normal purchasing? Third, who is responsible for the infrastructure that the solution depends on? Fourth, what cost is being treated as a premium and what cost is being ignored in the conventional alternative? Fifth, what belief about value, risk, responsibility, or control would have to change before this becomes the default? Those are not soft questions. They are commercial questions. They are strategy questions. They are the questions that determine whether a circular innovation becomes a business model or remains a case study. Renewcell's story is not over, of course. Circulose has been relaunched under new ownership, and the post-bankruptcy model appears to be changing. The new effort is focused on deeper brand partnerships, reduced friction, and more durable commitments. And that matters because the lesson from the first chapter was not simply that the material needed a market. The lesson was that the market needed a different operating arrangement around the material. That is the real work, not just better circular products, but better circular buying systems. So if your organization has a circularity pilot that worked but did not scale, do not only ask what went wrong with the pilot, ask what the pilot revealed. Did it reveal a cost problem, a specification problem, a responsibility boundary, a supplier commitment problem, a finance problem, a procurement rule that still belongs to the old model? That is where the diagnosis begins, because the pilot may have actually done its job. It may have shown you exactly where the ceiling is. And if you have a circularity pilot that worked technically but has not moved into normal purchasing, this is exactly the kind of ceiling that my ceiling snapshot is designed to examine. In one focused diagnostic conversation, we look at where the ceiling may actually be: procurement, finance, responsibility boundaries, supplier commitments, or commercial risk, or belief that's underneath the buying rule. If that would be useful, book a ceiling snapshot discussion with me. And if you're not sure whether this pattern applies, send me the short version of what happened, and I'll take a look. I'm also speaking with leaders about where credible circularity work stalls inside real businesses, because circularity does not become real when the pilot works. It becomes real when the buying system changes.